Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we're going to be discussing the Economics State of the Union in March of 2025 in the United States, which I think is going to be very fascinating because at one part, it seems like we're doing the right thing by cutting our expenses, which is what you need to do when you have a bloated federal budget and you're basically 37 trillion in the hole. Now, the next thing you need to do is raise your income. Seriously, you decrease expense. This is not hard. Decrease expenses, raise income. So what's the proposals? To cut your income, $4.5 trillion. Stupid. To cut the federal estate tax, which I can get to later because the argument, oh, you already paid taxes on it. You did not. And I can demonstrate you do not pay taxes on your appreciation because of Section 1014 of the Internal Revenue Code giving a step up in basis. And I benefited from that. So this whole idea, in our family, we never paid taxes on that money. So that's ridiculous. But with that, we're going to look at more of the State of the Union of the United States. Terrible, terrible times. Cutting expenses, I agree with, even though it's really hard. Raising revenue, they have a hard time in Congress raising revenue. Apparently, there's only one Republican I'm inviting on this show who actually has a master's degree from MIT and a bachelor's degree from MIT. And he's a Republican congressman who actually figured it out. You have to do both. But with that, let's go to the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who figured this out a long time ago, but apparently no one's listening. So, David, other than our show, I'm going like, are these people really that dumb in Washington, D.C.? I mean, seriously, business is real simple. You increase your revenue, you decrease your expenses. You do that, you have profit. Okay, you can't decrease your expenses and decrease your revenue and think that you're going to get out of a hole. As they say in Pawn Stars, it ain't happening. And I'm just like floored as to how dumb these people are, which is one reason I live in Barcelona. Anyway, you can take it away, David. It's
I would respectfully suggest they're not dumb. They just lack courage. And they lack the willingness to tell the truth and do the right thing. I assume the member of Congress you're talking about is Thomas Massie, who I know and who graduated from.
Bingo! It is Thomas Massie, and I called his office this morning, by the way. Yeah. Good guess.
And Thomas, Thomas, in many cases, is the lone person to vote against things. He may end up voting against the continuing resolution. But let's go back to last week. What some people refer to as the State of the Union, although technically it was not a State of the Union, it was a joint address to Congress because the president, Trump, had only been president for, about 5 or 6 weeks. And therefore, the tradition is it's more talking about what do you want to accomplish rather than what has been accomplished to date. And then where do you go from there? I would say several things as we get started. First, it was a good night for Trump. It was a bad night for the Democrats. Trump focused on what he believes he had accomplished in the 5 to 6 weeks that he had been president, focused on the issues that he ran on, such as economics, such as border security, such as international stability. The Democrats sat on their hands the whole night, even during times where individuals were being recognized for various reasons, where, most human beings would have stood up and clapped or at absolute minimum clapped, but they didn't do that. I think, what we have to recognize is, let's go to the economics. The president wants to make fundamental changes in areas dealing with economics. I mean, he wants to significantly cut spending, and DOGE is part of that effort. But I think people need to understand that the so-called Department of Government Efficiency is really not doing an audit. It's really doing a tactical transaction review of various government information systems using artificial intelligence, and it's identifying possible or probable examples of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And that obviously fires up the public because the public obviously, has a low opinion of the federal government to begin with. And so to the extent that you can give them examples of things that they would deem to be inappropriate, maybe not illegal, but inappropriate, if you will, then that further, stokes public concern. At the same point in time, the way that DOGE is going about its work, they're not targeted enough. They're not transparent enough. They're not being truthful with regard to what they're really finding and how much they're really saving. Ultimately they need a course correction. But the bottom line is this: no matter what they do, they're going to make a modest dent in our huge fiscal imbalance. We're running a $5.5 billion deficit a day, over $2 trillion a year. And it will grow over time if we do nothing because of known demographic trends, rising healthcare costs, and rising interest costs. And so the idea that, we're going to be able to solve our problem just by eliminating fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, which we should have zero tolerance for, but it'll never be zero, is mindless. That's just not going to happen. The first thing you have to do is you have to freeze and or cut spending on a case-by-case basis. And, we've got a continuing resolution that's supposed to be considered this week as in order not to shut down the government. And that's the approach that they're going to try to take. They're going to try to basically freeze spending and cut it in a few areas, if you will, but not deal with the structural imbalance. You're right, Nick. You want pro-growth policies. You have to cut spending, projected spending, but you're going to need more revenues. And all of these things ought to be considered as a percentage of GDP. We are spending above the post-World War II average based as compared to GDP. We are taxing a little bit below the post-World War II average as compared to GDP. If you go by current law, which among other things assumes that the that the Trump tax cuts will all expire, which is not a reasonable assumption, which among other things assumes that we won't be involved directly or indirectly in any international conflicts, even though we already are, which assumes that we won't have a serious recession, which assumes that we won't end up creating any new government programs. I mean, I would respectfully suggest that all of those assumptions are totally unrealistic. But even with that, spending as a percentage of GDP rises significantly in the future, and the gap between spending and revenues gets greater. And so, yes, we need pro-growth policies, which means to be more judicious about spending, which means regulatory relief, and a variety of other actions. But we're not going to be able to grow our way out of this problem. We're not going to be able to cut our way out. We're going to have to make some tough choices on revenues. And that could end up being significantly reducing and or eliminating a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions. I mean, you're right about the estate tax. I mean, you're not paying taxes twice. And the other thing is that we're not paying our way. I mean, no matter what kind of tax you want to talk about, when you're running a $5.5 billion deficit a year, we're obviously not paying for all the spending that's taking place. And one of the real controversial things that's happening now, and the markets are reacting to it, is Trump's talk about tariffs. He seems to be enamored with tariffs. I mean, our country, meaning the United States, was funded primarily, the federal government, by tariffs up until the late 1800s. But the world's a very different place than it was now than it was then. I mean, as recently as 1912, the federal government was only 2.5% of the economy. Now it's approaching 25%, growing rapidly. I mean, the world's a very different place than it was back in the late 1800s. And Trump is very non-traditional in many different ways. I mean, he was a showman last week. I mean, he knows how to produce television shows, and that's part of what last week was. But he also uses tariffs in ways that are non-traditional. He uses them as a negotiation tactic to try to achieve other objectives. For example, greater border security on the southern and northern borders, and trying to also stem the flow of fentanyl through those borders, rather than the more traditional way, which is to level the playing field where there are unfair trading practices that are being used. He's on again, off again with regard to some of his tariff proposals, and the markets don't like that uncertainty. We obviously don't want a global trade war. That makes no sense. His latest approach is to embrace the concept of reciprocity, meaning if you're going to tax certain of our items at a certain percent, then we're going to do the same thing to you. We'll see how that plays out, because in some cases that actually can result in creation of a level playing field, an improved situation. For example, automobiles that we send to Europe. Europe, has historically imposed a tariff of 10.5% on automobiles, whereas we end up imposing about 1.5-2%. Well, that's a big difference. And while we helped Europe recover from the ashes of World War II, I mean, Europe has largely recovered now, although we're doing a lot better than they are from an economic standpoint. So there's also some concern about whether or not we're going to have a recession in 2025. There's some question about whether or not there's going to be negative economic growth in the first quarter of this year. And so I think, and a lot of that has to do with the trade issue. So, bottom line is, I've said many times before, and I'll probably say it many times again, buckle your seatbelt and get your popcorn. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Well, that's good, because we're going to have an interesting ride today on our show. We're going to bring our panelists from around the world. From Southern California, we'll have David Kinder, who's joining us. From Canada, we'll have Sasha Starr, who's joining us. And from also Southern California, Rick Rosner, who's going to be joining us. And Rick, you have a comment about what's going on here at the State of the Union.
Well, I dug down into Peyton McNabb, the girl who took a spike to the face, a savage spike to the face from a trans volleyball player during a match that gave her permanent brain damage. And according to newspapers, that ball was traveling at 70 miles an hour, which is super fast. But then I looked at it. I slowed down the video and watched it frame by frame, and the ball that took her out was traveling at 41 miles an hour, which half the players on any varsity team in America could spike at. So the Trump brought these heroes in. I just looked at one thing, because I have OCD. I get focused on things, and just that one part. There's this one volleyball hero standing up for women and no men's, and there's no evidence that the player on the other team was trans. So the whole thing with that one guest at the State of the Union was kind of garbage. That's all I have.
It's a show. Speaking of a show, we have Jatovi McDuffie from North Carolina. He puts on a good show. So for the Progressive, go on, Jatovi.
Just Rick, she wasn't the only garbage prop that was up there. Even they had a black kid that they wanted to rant and rave about. Ooh,
the brain cancer kid, 13-year-old kid with brain cancer.
As Trump is cutting, childhood cancer research. So all that stuff was just a prop stuff. It was a show, just as was pointed out earlier. None of it had any meaning other than, hey, we're going to give red meat and cover the eyes of what we're actually doing, which is what I wanted to ask. Now, Dave, again, I love you and all. And we all have to agree that we want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. But that's a term that's been used so much where, it really doesn't talk about anything. It has no meaning. It's just, hey, I'm saying these words. Don't you like what I mean now? But what I want to say is, how can we say we're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse when Trump is trying to put $100 billion to back crypto?
Well, that's crypto that we already own. he's not buying any new crypto. My understanding is that the crypto that he's talking about is crypto that has been obtained by the United States largely through recoveries related to illegal activities. And believe me, there's plenty of illegal activities that take place with crypto, which is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of crypto. Look, let's look, getting back to economics, let's look at the House budget resolution. The House budget resolution, if you consider current law, it makes the situation going forward worse by about $2.8 trillion over 10 years, meaning higher deficits, higher debt by that amount over 10 years. If you consider it based on current policy, which among other things assumes that all the tax cuts will continue, that they won't expire, then it potentially can save some money. But that's just it. I mean, the Congress wants to end up changing how you keep score. And when you talk about fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement with regard to DOGE, a vast majority of what they're talking about is not illegal. A vast majority of what they're talking about is not fraud. A lot of what they're talking about are frankly contracts that we've already spent the money, that maybe we shouldn't have issued the contract, or maybe we are halfway through the contract, so we got to pay half of it. We can end up canceling the rest. Or maybe it's a difference between policy priorities for the Biden administration and the Trump administration, which there's a huge difference in that regard. But one of the things that they're learning is, the president can't cut spending by himself. Congress controls the purse. And if the president can cancel whatever he wants to cancel, in theory, but only the Congress can reduce spending. He has to get permission from the Congress to rescind those funds. Otherwise, you have to spend it on something else. So maybe you don't spend it on something that he doesn't want to spend it on, but you got to spend it on something else, which, by the way, is dumb. Okay. I mean, where in effect, where Congress does appropriations and says, this is the ceiling and this is the floor. You got to spend this and you got to spend all of this. Okay. Which makes no sense. So that's why one of the reasons why I think that they're moving more towards RIFs, reductions in force, and hiring freezes, is because on those, the Congress just says, this is the maximum. They don't give you a minimum. Therefore, if they do a hiring freeze, if they do a reduction in force, they can save money this year and in future years. But you have to be concerned what the potential consequences are. What are the skills and knowledge of the people that you're talking about? What are the roles that they play? What is their performance as compared to ones that are left behind? So, it's a lot more complicated than they would like you to believe.
Yes, it's very complicated. I'll tell you that on a weekend I spent time. We went out to the restaurant with my good friends, and he owns a business in automotive industry. And what he's saying is that when U.S. was about a month ago to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian products, and then canceled about the same day or postponed for a month. Now comes a month, and he now again puts off the tariffs, and then probably the same day he backed out of it. Now, what's interesting is that first time stock market nosedive about 3%, and once he canceled that, it recovered, fully recovered in just one day. Now, second time around, it also dropped about 3%, but it did not recover. And you know why? Because they're understanding that this is a play, this is a nice thing. He just feels like in the morning to impose tariffs, and in the afternoon, after a good lunch, he says that, you know what, I changed my mind. But what's happened in the reality is that even the first time that happened, he noticed, my friend, that his business is going down. Even the tariffs were postponed for a month. Why? Because his American counterparts, they started, because of the tariffs, if not now, then a month later, but one day there will be more, they will not be able to buy his products. So they are searching for alternate suppliers in the United States, if there are any, probably not at good quality and price that he is providing. So, but it is still less than same price at plus 25%. So what is it's happening is that the sufferings, although the tariffs have not been really imposed, but this non-stop threats, they are derailing the Canadian businesses that involves selling to US and US counterparts who are now have to source maybe not so good quality products, not at so good price, but simply because they perceived the threat as a real one. One day they believe that it will happen. So right now, many contracts were now put on hold. His business is suffering tremendously. It's a good thing that Canada now provides new financial incentives, grants. They're looking now for partners in Asia, Europe, and elsewhere to replace the US. Same as it's doing now with liquefied gas, now the brand new, extremely strong production facilities of liquefied gas will be completed in Canada in 2025, and the new contracts are being signed with Europe, with China, with Japan, with Korea. And I don't think that US will be a great winner in the tariff war. Not this time. 150 years ago, perhaps. Not today. They will be demolished by their own imposed the tariffs war.
Well, I'm very concerned about the tariff situation. You look at the market today, the market's really getting hit hard, especially technology companies today. It's one thing to be able to use tariffs when you believe that they're unfair trading practices and you want to try to level the playing field. In that circumstance, they can make sense, but hopefully they're targeted and temporary in nature. But the idea that we're going to use tariffs as a means to raise, hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue to try to be able to deal with our fiscal challenge, I think is a pipe dream. And obviously it's creating a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability, a lot of volatility. And ultimately, that's going to have to be dealt with because despite what the administration may say, they can't be immune from what's going on in the markets. And by the way, one of the things that the administration says is that, look, we're in a transition period. You got to look for the long term. All right. If we don't put our finances in order, we're going to have a lot bigger problems in the future. And yet they're not doing anything about that because what DOGE is doing is very, very modest as compared to what needs to be done.
David, I don't think that when you are looking for the distant future and sacrificing the present, first of all, people in the present may not even survive and get into the distant future, as you suggest. Then, look, it's a self-imposed recession, if not depression, which is coming to the United States. It's self-inflicted. There was no reason whatsoever for the US going into recession because companies were showing good profitability, good earnings revenue growth, and there is no reason for US except that what's doing Republican Party get country into recession. And I'll tell you that it doesn't look pretty. It's really self-imposed. And I don't understand one thing, what you said earlier, that, okay, so you have to cut expenses, and this is what DOGE is doing. Okay, that's reasonable. On the other hand, you have to raise revenue. So if you have to raise revenue, to raise taxes is the easiest and the fastest way to raise revenue, if that's what you really want. So maybe, I'm missing something. Maybe US doesn't want to raise revenue, right? Or if it does, what is the source?
They want to raise revenue, but they don't want to raise taxes.
It doesn't work.
No, I understand. And the other thing you have to be careful about is depending upon what you do on tariffs, you may end up raising revenue, but it could end up raising prices as well. And obviously, one of the things that the Trump administration wants to do is to keep inflation low, because one of the reasons that he ended up winning was because of public concern over excess inflation during the Biden administration. Mark?
Yeah, just along those same lines, that's where I was going to go and everything, David, is that I know that in the polls that are out there lately, and I know that Rick follows those as well, there's a lot of concern about the cost of living, and a lot of Americans are frustrated by the cost of living, whether that's the price of food like eggs and bread and things like that, or whether that's even the price of housing and everything. So I was wondering, as one that has done this work before, do you think that we're doing enough to address these basic needs? Because I can tell you right here in North Carolina, where I'm based at, and I know Utopia's here as well, that we're seeing a lot of buildings that are being developed and that are being created that are overpriced. I'll just put it that way. There are apartments that are being built, but they are being built at a not fair price point and everything along those lines. I'm thinking that that's across the nation, because I've got friends in New York, I've got friends in Miami, and there's a lot of empty buildings that have been built even out in California, where Rick is, that are sitting empty because they are built and then are not filled. And so is that something that you feel that we're doing enough to address?
Well, several things. One, if you talk about eggs, the primary problem with eggs is bird flu. 2 million chickens were killed in order to help contain bird flu. So it's supply and demand. And until we end up, being able to stabilize, the supply of chickens, who obviously generate the eggs, then we're going to have an issue there. But that won't last forever. Secondly, housing affordability is a real question. There's absolutely no question about that. And mortgage rates, are much higher now than they were during the first Trump administration. And one of the things that he's concerned about is that how can we get mortgage rates down in order to be able to improve affordability of housing. What you want to avoid is a bubble, which is what you're alluding to, where you overdevelop. Okay, I don't think it's like at current interest rates, you're not likely to have overdevelopment. When interest rates were very, very low, which they were a few years ago, then you could end up having overdevelopment, because you end up having people trying to take advantage of building, when interest rates are low. Look, inflation affects everybody. It's, as has been said, the cruelest tax of all. It affects the poor much more than it affects the wealthy. And, any administration needs to be focused like a laser on trying to control inflation. But one of the concerns that I have is that we have economic growth, but it's debt financed economic growth. And one of the reasons that we had excess inflation is because spending was out of control, and the Federal Reserve monetized a lot of the excess spending, which grew the money supply, which resulted in excess inflation. They're doing a better job on that now, but they've still got way too large a balance sheet that ultimately they're going to have to unravel in the coming years.
Right, David Kendrick.
One of the other things that I'm concerned about, and something that really can't be fixed, is the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Minimum wages are much higher, and I've never heard of a minimum wage ever going down. And when we look at the cost of running a business, the minimum wage is a government-imposed tax on labor based on the current skill set. And we will look at the price of housing and such. Right now, Amazon is pushing out a whole lot of ads, because I keep seeing them on YouTube. Our average Amazon person's earning at least $22 an hour. And I'm looking at here and like, what's that going to do? That's not going to do a whole lot for people out here in Southern California. And looking at Irvine, which is one of the wealthier districts, wealthier zip codes in the country, and they say they're going to produce affordable housing. Yeah, right. I'll believe it when I see it. Because if you make it too affordable, you're going to get the unwanted element in that community, and that is not going to happen in Irvine. As far as the State of the Union, Trump is being Trump. Unfortunately, I could say this is a 3-time Trump voter. I like what Trump is doing. I just don't like the way he's doing it. He didn't have to call out the left as the opposition the way he did. He didn't have to call out against Biden the way he did. I don't remember any other president ever doing that and conducting themselves this way in a joint session of Congress. And And as far as some of the things that Trump was talking about, as far as what Doge is finding, one of them was the research on, he called it transgender mice. That's not what it is. It is research on these mice that actually helps in multiple diseases. And whatever that research is, it is not what he said it was. So it's helpful to make sure that we actually clarify exactly what it is, not misclassify it, so we actually know what's going on. And so when we get the clarity, that's a whole different thing than completely mislabeling what that research is.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's happening. Let's go back to economics, for example. For example, the president has said within the last 24 hours, Doge has saved several $100 billion. That's total bull. I would be surprised if Doge has saved, 20-30 billion dollars. Okay, I'm talking about real absolute savings. Although they are pointing out some real troubling situations, no question about it. All right. A lot of people, I think, are in the same category that you are with regard to Trump. And that is, they like a lot of the things that he's doing. They don't like how he does it. They don't like his style. Personally, there's no way in the world that Trump is better than George Washington. Okay. And secondly, there's no way in the world that Biden is the worst president, because nobody's going to displace Buchanan, whose incompetence led to the Civil War. But
There we go.
Except Trump.
Yeah, but what frustrates me is, why does he have to overstate things? I mean, just state the facts, okay? Just state the facts. You don't rate yourself, okay? Other people rate you, and history has a tendency to kind of modify things over time. So go ahead.
Well, what's interesting is the CBS poll.
But 1 second. The minimum wage issue is a state issue, because the federal minimum wage is $7.25 and hasn't changed for decades. But go ahead.
Yeah,
Eggs cost more than that. So sorry.
Yeah, there we go. So you got to work an hour at minimum wage to afford your eggs. So the thing with I just lost my thought.
Two, you have to work
I hate it
two.
when that happens. But the Democrat opposition and such, that was hilarious with the bingo paddles, or are they bidding for something? I don't know what that was all about. That was interesting. But
CBS poll, you were saying. The
CBS poll, thank you. The CBS poll was interesting that it showed that 74% of respondents think that Trump had acted very presidential, which makes me wonder, where is consumer sentiment? Where's the voter sentiment in class on that? I find that rather telling. There were some other statistics, but I can't remember them all. 74% was favorable. I thought that was interesting.
No, that's right. The public liked what they heard, but I think part of that was because of how the Democrats behaved. They behaved so poorly. In contrast, he looked better. Jatovi?
Just a few things. The reason that the polling was high was because many of the individuals who were against Trump didn't actually watch the actual presidential address. So most of the polling was done with most Republicans who ended up watching that. And he still has a high rating amongst the Republican base. So the polling, of course, there is definitely going to be high when you go to the quote unquote public. Also, if you also look at, in terms of what you had asked David about the consumer sentiment, I mean, you can look at the stock market. You can look at the fact that people are already outraged over the price of eggs, which Kim just really brought up very quickly. And the fact that the Republican Party doesn't hold town halls anymore, because individuals that go there want to complain about what the Republican Party and what Doge is actually doing. And the Republican Party doesn't have a response for that at this moment. So that right there tells you it's not really 74% that really approves of what he wants and what he's doing. There's actually an uproar, that's a groundswell that's really starting to grow, and that's being ignored and being told that, oh, well, that's just Democrat operatives. Oh, well, they just, as you saw in the actual address, hey, those are the enemies of the individuals. Those are enemies. They don't know what they're talking about. They're all this and that and the other thing. Just basically that division, which we should not have. And in terms of minimum wage and the lower bracket and that raising and causing issues, we always complain that it's the minimum wage that is causing the issues, when we say a rich person can get as much money as they want and so on and so forth. But that money that they're getting, they're making it a lot off the backs of the individuals that they pay less and less and less. So the system itself is trying to play referee as it should, so the people aren't truly taken advantage of. Hence the reason why it's okay for minimum wage to raise. What's the old saying? If the water rises, all boats rise. So hence the reason that's minimum wage itself, which could actually help, which is, we pointed out, still sitting at $7.25 or whatever, and hasn't changed in about a century, half a century. So the point that I want to get to again, and this gets back to the economics, Dave, at what point can we finally admit, or at what point do we have to get to be able to admit that there really is no long-term strategy and everything was built on, I'm just going to say some red meat words that you really like to hear, hence the reason all the falsehoods and lies that he told in the address were the same as what he told on the campaign trail that got him elected, because he came in on a bunch of lies anyway. So at what point can we just be honest and say, look, there was no long-term strategy. It's not about you being wrong or me being right or whatever else. It's just that there's no long-term strategy and we have a problem.
Yeah, let me come back to that. First, in my opinion, he campaigned on certain issues. He campaigned on the economy and inflation. He campaigned on border security and crime. He campaigned on international stability. He campaigned on energy independence. All right. And he campaigned on right-sizing government. All right. And for the most part, he's taking steps that are consistent with what he campaigned on. Now, on the other hand, some of the claims that he's making with regard to actions and activities with regard to that are grossly overstated or misrepresented. But I think he is campaigning. He is acting consistent with what he campaigned on for the most part.
Well, Dave, if I could just clarify my point just to help you out on the answer, because yes, we agree. He campaigned saying the economy.
Right.
He campaigned saying tariffs were going to be able to cover the cost of taking away taxes.
Yeah.
That was a lie then, and we know that it's a lie now. So that's my point, is that at what point must we get to, knowing that it was a lie then, he won on that lie. He is now in office saying that same lie. At what point can we say he doesn't have a strategy?
Hold on. I don't think that most Americans understand how tariffs work. And I don't think that most Americans would know some of the things that we know on here about what the history is with regard to tariffs, about what's realistic and what's not realistic, whatever. I think most Americans made decisions based upon what the issues that he campaigned on rather than all the details. I will say this, you're expressing one of the frustrations that I have, and that is there's misrepresentation, there's disinformation, there's misinformation, and that needs to stop. But let's come back to your original point, which is there's no plan. The truth is there's never been a plan for the United States. The United States does not have a strategic framework. It does not have key outcome-based indicators. Both political parties have failed us on that since the beginning of the republic. And one of the things I'm trying to fight for is to develop such a strategic framework with outcome-based indicators so that we can do a better job of understanding what are we trying to accomplish, how do we measure success, how can we match resources and authorities to try to achieve those. If things are working great, if they're not eliminate them. But we don't have that. So there is no plan. So we are flying blind in growing mountains of debt without an instrument panel. I would say that's fundamentally imprudent. Sasha, I can't hear you. You're muted, but
Can you hear me now?
yes, sir.
Okay. One of the points that he was campaigning on was that he would, speaking about international relations, that he would create a peace between Russia and Ukraine in
Day one.
24 hours, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, okay, 24 hours is out, so maybe 100 days, maybe 1,000 days. It doesn't matter so much, except one thing. Justified peace for both Ukraine and Russia. What he's done lately, he completely changed side, being 100% on Russia and 100% against Ukraine. Now, he was not campaigning on that at all. That was his interpretation of just and justifiable peace between two countries. What he's doing is completely different, and there will be consequences international arena, and I don't think that US will look very pretty. The country that absolutely throws its friends under the bus, the country that nobody can trust anymore, the country that has to be avoided by all costs because of the Ukraine at the very beginning of all his overtures about peace in 24 hours say, thank you, Mr. Trump, we'll decide for ourselves when, if we need the peace. Bye-bye. They would be in a better position than they are today, that essentially he's driving Ukraine to capitulation. That's his understanding of justifiable peace.
Yeah.
I'm very upset about it.
I can understand that. You're from Ukraine. I can appreciate that. Let me, this is a good example of the difference between the campaign and what was talked about during the campaign and the details, right? And there's a big difference. He campaigned saying that he would end up ending the Ukraine war, Russia-Ukraine war, within 24 hours or whatever it was, right? And believe it or not, the American people want that war ended. Okay. On the other hand, how do you go about doing it, right? So on one hand, he's saying, I'm going to end it. He obviously didn't end it as quickly as he said. At some point in time, it will end. The question is, on what basis will it end? But he didn't get into a lot of the details that you're talking about. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, people would feel differently about it. It's the old story. It's not just what you do, but how you do it that matters. It's not just what you say, but how you say it that matters. And so I said 3 years ago how I think the Russia-Ukraine war is going to end, and I think that's how it's going to end. But the way that people are going about trying to achieve that, I think, can be very troubling and can be destabilizing and can end up harming international relations.
I'm not going to be very popular on this network if I'll say.
Oh, you're always popular, Sasha. Come on. People can reasonably disagree. Yeah.
Well, I wish that Ukraine, in its wisdom, will reject, first of all, this so-called the rare earth metal deals. And apparently, I was able to learn what it's all about. Ukraine has uranium, which is required by everybody in the world. And it was very cleverly camouflaged as a part of rare earth metals, which is not. So if I were Ukraine, I would reject this deal 100%. I would thank US for support for last 3 years, and it helped Ukraine a great deal, but their help is no longer required. Thank you very much.
Well, help me out on something, Sasha, because
Yes.
the claim was that Ukraine has a lot of rare earth minerals. Okay. But then I looked it up, and Ukraine's not even, it's not top 15 in the world in rare earth minerals. Okay. No. And it's also my understanding that a lot of the quote unquote rare earth minerals that Ukraine has is in Russian occupied territory. So I'm sitting here scratching my head saying, what the hell is this all about? Okay, it doesn't make sense.
David, I've clarified it already. It's all
Yeah.
about uranium. There is no rare earth metals issue whatsoever. It's uranium. That's what U.S.
Where is the uranium? Which part of Ukraine is it in?
Northwest part of Ukraine.
Okay, north, good. So it's on the other side of the river.
It's other side. It's occupied by Ukrainians.
Okay, good. All right, good. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
It's helpful to Ukrainians, not U.S.
No, but it's helpful.
Get it.
Well, I mean, it's helpful to know is what I mean. I'm not
Totally agree with you.
decide.
Well, the fact remains, David, the fact remains that what Trump did, he got Ukrainian to the point of surrender. He is almost there. By withholding all help, the electronics, the intelligence exchange, everything. Ukrainian army right now is blind. It doesn't see anything. He withhold all support from F-16s, so they cannot, they're like flying targets. They cannot do the job why the Ukrainians acquired them in the first place. So it's at the same time, Russia has not made even a single concession whatsoever, nothing, zero. They just keep repeating that there will be no concessions from Russia. There will be no stop of fire with negotiations or without negotiations. This is how Trump negotiates. Sorry, not a great news for you Americans. For Ukrainians, it's a different story.
Well, hopefully it will eventually end, and hopefully Europe will step up. So
Without U.S. Right now, the first thing what Ukraine has to do is completely distance itself, because uranium, anybody needs uranium. China needs uranium. Europe needs uranium. They don't need America for disposing their uranium. Period. Now, U.S. is already stopped any help what Ukraine. All I'm praying is that they're not going to help Russia, because right now, basically, what he's doing, he wants to create alliance with Putin and with Emperor Xi with the help of Putin, and to have triumvirate of U.S., Russia, China. That's what Trump is doing. Ukraine is a small potato. In fact, Ukraine, he has to deliver Ukraine, which will surrender and capitulate, to Russia, and then he will do the same thing with the Taiwan. He will deliver Taiwan to China, and then he will achieve his geopolitical goals.
all right, Mark, and then Kim. You're muted, Mark.
Yeah, I was on mute. Hey, David, switch your topic just slightly and everything. One of the things that I've been finding kind of humorous, and I don't know if you've been seeing this online as well, is there are a number of people that were pro-Trump and were very much for Trump in terms of their support for him as president and everything. But I think that they forgot that their job could be in jeopardy and everything. So I just wanted your reaction to that, because I've seen on YouTube a number of people that have gone like, wait a minute, you said you were going to have deep cuts and everything. You didn't tell me that I was going to be one of the cuts. And now they are having second thoughts around their vote and everything, because they're going like, I didn't think that I was going to be one of the victims of these cuts. I thought it was going to be those other people.
Well, first, Trump won the electoral votes with over 300 electoral votes. He won the popular vote, but did not have a majority of those who voted. Okay, but he did win the popular vote. He won every swing state. Okay, he ended up increasing his percentages among key groups: young people, blacks, Hispanics, etc. So, you know, from a top line standpoint, he did well. It was not a mandate. I wouldn't argue that it's a mandate, but I think he won for two reasons, and then I'll answer your question. Number one, he ran because he focused on the issues that people were concerned about. All right. And number two, he had an incredibly weak opponent. All right. So I think that's why he won. Now, with regard to the people whose jobs are affected, to the extent that you're talking about people in government, I can assure you that a significant majority of the people in government are not of Trump's political persuasion. Okay. As I said, I think government needs to be right-sized. There's no question about that. I'm not happy with regard to how they're going about it. There's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. It needs to be done, but it ought to be done the right way. I did that at GAO. I eliminated about 30% of all the offices. I eliminated 15% of the head count, a whole layer of management, consolidated 35 units to 13, leveraged information technology, modernized human capital practices, changed our metrics. And even though we were smaller, we were 50 to 100% more productive, 3 times the outcome-based results, 95% positive rating from our client, the Congress, and second best place to work in the federal government. All right. That's doing it the right way. And ultimately, I think what's happening is DOGE is doing shock and awe, which is going to undercut public trust and confidence in government, going to divide further Democrats and Republicans, and that ultimately we need to do it way in round 2 to be successful. Somebody needs to mute, to be successful and sustainable over time, and that ultimately we're going to have, as I've said many times, a statutory fiscal sustainability commission and a constitutional amendment that will facilitate making the tough choices and that will force the Congress to be able to continue to be fiscally sane and sustainable over time. Only a constitutional amendment can do that.
I see Rick's with us. Steve's with us and everything. But just to lead into Steve, I think it was actually West Virginia where he won heavily. One of the videos that I saw, and it was several people that were actually Republicans that were frustrated that their job was being cut and everything like that. So it's kind of like counter that they weren't necessarily pro-Trump candidates and everything.
And I know Republicans who, even though they don't talk about it publicly, are concerned about DOGE and how DOGE is going about doing what they're doing. Especially as it relates to reductions in force or layoffs and hiring freezes. Absolutely. They just don't talk about it publicly. Kim, you had your hand up. I know we got about 7 minutes left, I think.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm filming here live in Houston, Texas at CERAWeek by S&P Global and Agora Innovations. And a lot of, talk right now about many of the things that are going on. But I wanted to bring up one of the things that you mentioned, David, is, why was he going after the minerals in Ukraine? And it wasn't just there. It's an accumulation of.
We lost you.
She froze. Steve's with us as well.
I'm sorry, other countries that he's going after and claiming that he's going to stake claim in. So I just, a lot of countries are taking offense to that. They don't want to be part of America. I don't blame them. We don't keep our promises. And that's why Ukraine is in war. If they had kept all of their nuclear weapons, they wouldn't be in the situation they're in. And a lot of the people here, very, very, the influencers here have stated that Ukraine had better weapons than anyone else in the world. And that's why countries like America and other countries convinced them to set them aside and destroy them. And to me, their blood is on our hands. And a lot of people agree that it was very wrong of Trump to go in there and demand, that they pay us for something we caused. We caused this. Well, so, but it's, a lot of talk about tariffs this year, a lot of talk about things that we normally don't talk about here. But yeah, it's all because of a new president. I'm waiting for one of the journalists to meet me here from Pod TV, Rex Lee. As you know, he did some breaking news at CERAWeek last year that got everybody's attention. So I think that what we need to do is start looking at how we can protect ourselves, because everything that the administration in place right now, they're taking away everything that protects us. They're giving money to Elon to blow things up in space. Elon has sent a bill for DOGE for helping one of the federal agencies. and he's going to start doing that. We're going to start paying Doge. I think that was a $4 million bill. And, you know, Congress and Senate have just asked for $1.5 trillion for funding between now and September, which I would like to see the accounting of what they spent so far, David, and what they're going to spend that money on, because they're supposed to be saving us money, not costing us money. So what are your thoughts on the money that they're asking, David?
First, let's get some facts straight, okay? There was an
I
agreement.
can't hear you.
Well, I'm not. In 1994, I believe, there was an agreement called the Budapest Agreement, which was between Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And that agreement, those three countries committed to ensure the territorial integrity of Ukraine if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons with the breakup of the Soviet Union. Obviously, when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, the UK and United States did not honor that commitment. Obviously, when Russia reinvaded eastern Ukraine in 2022, that commitment was not honored. The difference is that weapons and other supplies were provided after the fact. You can't deter aggression after the fact. You have to deter it in advance. I might note that, even though I've got concerns about how Trump is doing a lot of things, he wasn't president in 2014 and in 2022, so you can't blame him for that. You can blame him for how he's handling the current situation, but he's not the one that didn't honor the promise. You need to also understand that there's a difference between an agreement that's a piece of paper that's only as good as the president who signed it, and a treaty, which is binding, which the Congress has to approve and the president has to sign and carries the force of law. NATO is a treaty. There is no treaty with Ukraine. There is no treaty with Taiwan either. With regard to a question we got about, I think we're going to end up having a CR, a continuing resolution. We may end up having a continuing resolution for the whole year, and therefore they end up having to punt on what are they going to do that's more significant to next year's budget situation. That would, and with regard to Doge, most of the people with Doge are volunteering their time. There are some paid people with Doge. My personal view is that Elon's got enough money that he ought to be able to pay whoever needs to be paid if he wants them to get paid. Although I will tell you that he's lost a lot of money since he's gotten involved with this.
We have one more minute left. Steve, you're here, so join in.
It's okay. I think my time's expired, but I want to thank David Walker, and sorry I was late. I guess next week, David, I would just ask you, you don't have to answer it now because we got to go, but what would be in the Democratic playbook to win back the Senate and the House and the presidency? But we can talk about that next week. And great insight. Thank you so much. As always, looking forward to having you come visit us here in North Carolina, maybe for me. And I thank you so much for great analysis today. I'm going to go back and watch what I missed. So,
and we're out of time, so we'll see everybody next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.